Hey guys, Coach here. Welcome to this week's episode. Hey, there is nothing worse for outdoor plans than having a good flooding rain the night before your event or your weekend and finding your backyard or your front yard or your yard period just flooded out the next day with standing water. You know, it kind of really ruins little Janie's birthday party that was supposed to happen, and it ends up getting restricted to maybe indoors or out on the patio at best. You know, it's a giant grr. Hey, this week we discuss flooded landscapes and identify the causes and, more importantly, the solutions. So let's get learning, shall we? Just a little something. I'm glad you're here. Hey guys, just a brief break in this week's podcast here and an invitation for you to go over to youryardcoach.com and check out the products and services that we offer there. For most people, DIY landscaping on a medium to larger level can be very, very intimidating. And the book and the course and some of the checklists that we do offer really streamline the process and bolster a DIYer's confidence. So I invite you to go over there, check it out. And if you have any questions, you can always email me at youryardcoach@gmail.com. Now, let's get back to the podcast. Hey, welcome back. If you follow along here, I would love to offer you the opportunity to reach out email-wise if you have any sort of landscape questions, especially about this week's episode, and I'll get back to each and every one of you. Hey, flooded landscapes are certainly an inconvenience and an annoyance, but there are those people out there where flooded landscapes become a way of life. But beyond the inconvenience, they can also be a genuine threat. A threat to your home, a threat to your health, and the overall value of the real estate in general. The threat stems from standing water in and around foundations with no evacuation means at all. Nothing more than slow percolation. This really can result in things like flooded basements, flooded foundations, wood rot, ever-present mold, when it starts to seep into wood, and wood is nothing more than a sponge, and it gets up into drywall and other things, you end up with mold, and the house is just basically unsafe to use on a regular basis. The threat extends out into the landscape as well. Standing water and regular flooding can result in poor lawn and plant health in general. The soil can result in sometimes almost like an anaerobic state where O2 and everything just gets cut off from the soil level and you get that stinky, stanky, stagnant smell. And it really results in an infertile area that has survived only by slime and algae and the death of many plants, trees, and turf areas. Flooding is not meant for the residential landscape. It may be meant for floodplains and other things that have evolved over tens of thousands of years, but not for your front or backyard. One of the biggest insurance claims filed by homeowners across this nation and probably world is the result of water damage in one way or another. Many folks shrug their collective shoulders and fail to take action, either because of professional costs or because they feel they cannot rectify the problem at hand. But you can. Insurance companies duck and dodge and find ways to take your money, but not give you any money. Are you in agreement with that? There are some companies that just plain flat ass won't pay out. And in that particular case, the homeowner is really stuck between a rock and a hard place. But as a responsible homeowner, it is your responsibility, your virtual job to assure the habitability of your home and yard. Letting a problem like this go and procrastinating on solutions is just plain irresponsible and can only hurt you in the long run as a result of the damage, the lack of useful space, and the sale potential down the road should it come around. Because you do have to disclose, remember? So let's talk about some of the causes. Some of the causes that I have seen and some of the causes that are obviously out there in the interwebs that you can research yourself. But the number one is poor grading and slope. Just because your house was built by professionals does not mean they left you with a professional job. How is the house placed on the property? Now, what I had at Weed Patch Ranch many years ago was the house was placed on almost the lower part of the property. My garage and my shop were placed on the higher parts of the property. And we're only talking a few inches of difference, but holy cow, the first winter I was there, I learned in a darn quick hurry with all the water that came down after 2 big rain events that I had water going right up to my foundation. And I had to get on it, and I had to get on it fast. But poor grading and slope, this allows for water to accumulate in one area or more throughout the property, the low areas. And is that at your foundation? Sometimes it is. Many causes stem from the lack of, simple things like gutters, resulting in dumping water and splash factor right at your foundation. Foundations are threatened when this happens, as well as siding, walkways, plant material, everything that is an outdoor space. Another thing is no drainage system is in place whatsoever, which allows for the roof runoff, even if you have gutters, to accumulate right at the house itself. We have to put in a drainage system that at least above ground, but certainly better underground, removes the water away from the dwelling and out into an area where it can be safely discharged. The other thing is soil conditions. Soils that are very compacted and drainage or percolation that is greatly inhibited, combined with other listed issues that I just mentioned, which only compounds the flooding problems. And lastly, overwatering or not checking timers on the irrigation system. And an irrigation system's run times can also lead to flooding. So those are some of the causes, but let's talk about the positive. Let's talk about the solutions. Our first solution, unless for some structural reason preventing it, houses should have gutters or some form of house runoff capture system. Rain capture and actual rain harvesting is an alternative and in great popularity in places where droughts are just a normal way of life. Gutters can be professionally installed, of course, but they can also be done by the DIYer by going down to the box stores. You can even have professional seamless gutters created and then given to you, and you can put them up yourself. If you live in a heavy rainfall area where you know that when the heavens open up a lot, that you might want to consider maximizing the size of the gutter trough so that it can handle bigger rain events. Upgrading from a 4-inch maybe to a 6-inch style of trough can capture a heck of a lot more water, and you won't have that overflow that comes off the roof because the gutters are overwhelmed. If no gutters are present and you don't plan on putting any on there in the future, consider some type of capture system at the ground level. Consider a French drain capture right at or just a little bit out from the drip line of the roof. If you dig a nice trench and a sediment sock wrapped drain line at a minimum, then you're far and away ahead of the game and you can get that water away from your house. Once the water is captured off of the roof and you have it in a drain system, you may be faced with water diversion and capture all over the landscape as well. Maybe you have other low spots or water that comes in from the neighbors or a natural hillside. Drain lines continue from the gutter and the downspouts, but these lines should also be able to be tied into yard drainage systems and have the water whisked away from the dwelling and the yard and to a safe evacuation point. You may employ the use of things called capture drains out there in the landscape, where you know that you really can't regrade the area, so you're going to capture the water that's out there by use of a capture basin and then connect a drain line to the basin and run it either off the property or away from the area, or tie it into your main system and evacuate the water that way. Now, going to the actual problem at hand, correcting the slope and grade You must first identify where and how much correction is really needed. It may only be an inch or two here and there where you know that, hey, it ponds out there in the back corner, or water collects right here on the south side of the house. But as long as you know that, you should be able to correct the grade and slope fairly easily by importing other soils and in addition to the drainage systems. Once you recorrect the grade, you're out in the landscape drainage systems can capture any runoff, and your downspouts will capture stuff at the foundation. You want to have like a 1% pitch away from the house, and it makes it so much easier to go out there at a rain event and see water being correctly managed and moved in a direction where it's under control and discharged correctly. If you have the situation like I had when I had Weed Patch Ranch, you may need to install and implement a mechanical system. If you were down in a swale of a yard and the street is up above you and you have people down below you on either side of you, you may have to create a central sump system where your drainage system drains to the sump, and then you mechanically pump it by means of a sump pump up to the street level and discharge it that way. That's what I had at Weed Patch Ranch. I actually had two of them. I had them out, one near my shop, which captured everything that came down off the hill through the orchards, and then I had another one for the landscape and all the roof runoff. And let me tell you, there were some times where that thing was working overtime on constantly for an hour or two just to get rid of the water there. And we're talking a 2-inch discharge. So we're talking 30 gallons or more a minute that was being pumped. And it would go on for a couple, 3 hours while this rain event was there. Just don't be that guy or gal that does all this and then you just discharge it to the back of your neighbor's property. You know, in our litigious society, that is just not a good idea. And if something results from your poor decision making and results in your neighbor's discontinued use of their landscape or yard or their home or whatever, I wouldn't want to be at the end of that particular lawsuit. Many parts of the country and the world have really crappy, hard, and unworkable type of soils. I live in such a place right now up here in northern Maine. We have some pockets of usable soil, but for the most part, a lot of it is a sandy, rocky situation that really the only thing that thrives, unless I take extenuating efforts to create planting holes, is the native plants that are adapted up here. In cases such as this, corrective measures may consist of a lot of soil amending at the planting site, which I do. You know, planting a 1-gallon can, I'm digging a 5-gallon hole in order for it to take off and thrive. The 10-gallon trees that I put in last year, I'm digging a 20-gallon hole so that it really works. There's other machinery that can be brought in some cases. If you have a rocky, loamy, clay soil, things like rippers and Harley rakes and other stuff that really can churn up the soil very good and actually separate soil from rocks so that you can have things like a nice turf lawn out there where your neighbors wouldn't even think about putting it. So consider those options as well. And if you're just up against it and you know darn well that your particular property, now that you've corrected grades and slopes and everything else, but you just don't have the type of soil that's going to grow much, unless you just want to bang your head against the proverbial wall, you might want to consider different landscape options. Things like berms and contours by bringing in imported good soil, raised beds, or container gardens, depending on the size and how complex you want to make it. Sometimes those things alone will be enough to have a beautiful landscape, even though you don't have the native soil that's very good to accommodate you. So in summary, if any of these problems are present with your yard, the solutions are pretty kind of straightforward and doable with effort and thought. Plus, yeah, checkbook, I know. But the investment is far less than the possible outcome of a destroyed home or no property value whatsoever. And if nothing is done, you're never going to improve anything either. So think about some of the steps that I've outlined here. It's pretty straightforward as far as a solution. It just takes a lot of sweat equity. Or if you have a big checkbook, you can always hire someone to come in and do it. Hey, that's what I have for you guys this week. Hey, thanks for staying with me, and I hope you consider following along every week, every time I put a podcast out. As always, guys, to your landscape success, I'm always here and available to you. Again, don't forget to check out the website, youryardcoach.com, and I'll catch you guys next week. Bye for now.